Yeah, and I think that gets to the heart of the matter, which is, and I'll give one example. I won't name any names here, but you can.
If I
Well,
feel
I
like
think
naming
there's,
and shaming.
well, I mean, I think there's systematic theology projects like I think Wayne Grudem's, because it's probably the most read systematic theology in modern history, maybe in history writ large. Um, where he does a lot of what we call proof texting. He clarifies an idea, and then he gives a lot of passages. And when I work those passages as a biblical scholar, I'm many times going like, hey, I don't think that passage is doing what you think it's doing. I have to do the Indigo Montoya on Wayne. And I don't think Wayne is being deceitful. Anybody who knows Wayne, like, he's not trying to deceive anybody, or he's not trying to build a Rube Goldberg machine. He really believes he's clarifying what the tradition and Scripture teaches. But I was talking to a systematic theologian once who worked on omnipresence, and I said, "Oh, that's interesting. I've written on omnipresence, and I think it's kind of a problematic concept for lots of reasons from within Scripture." Um, and I said, "Well, what's your kind of go-to argument from Scripture?" And he said, "Oh, Psalm 139, where can I flee from the presence of the Lord? Everywhere I go, I will be there." Right, to paraphrase, right?
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to watch this guy who had been philosophically trained turn off his philosophical brain and quote that scripture as if it supported. And I was like, can you like turn your philosophical brain back on for 1 second? Assume that the biblical authors have a philosophical bone in their body. That in no way entails logically that God is everywhere present. It basically means God is a stalker. And the very point of the sentence, like if I said the same things to my wife, it doesn't mean that I'm omnipresent.
Right.
It means that I'm going to be where the goal is to show that I'm going to be present with her. It also doesn't logically negate omnipresence either,
No.
right?
No.
Because it's trying to do something else. And
Yes.
so those are the kinds of moves that I might even agree with in principle, the conclusion that they come to. But it's the method by which they're coming that makes me worried. So I wonder, do you see this? I mean, I'm thinking of Wayne, which he wrote a very popular level systematic theology. But do you think this is endemic in the program, or is it necessary, or am I just like getting too triggered by the few examples that I've seen?
I mean, you might just be getting triggered because there's loads of cases of this. For me, there was always this big disconnect because when I did my undergraduate training, I didn't really have a lot of training in systematics. I had a lot of training in biblical studies and biblical theology. And this kind of idea of going, you have to really look at what the passage means before you start jumping to do the dogma. I had that going on. And then I also had but I really like St. Augustine because he's so cool. So I've got these conflicting kind of ideas in my own upbringing, like my own intellectual education. And one of the things that helped me go back to Scripture is when I started reading lots of different kinds of theologians and philosophers and seeing how much disagreement there really is over a lot of these different doctrinal points about the nature of God, about salvation, about you name it. And one of the things that really forced me to do is I sit down, I read I read all of Wayne Grudem, and then I read any other systematic theologian, and then I come back to the biblical text. And I'm like, oh man, I'm seeing some stuff I didn't see before, or there's other stuff going on beneath the surface I wasn't paying attention to because I was only thinking in terms of, well, this is the answer that everyone and their mother always gave. I know that. Mm-hmm. Okay, well I don't because I didn't actually read the history part, didn't do that part of the homework, but I know that, right? So seeing lots of different kinds of disagreements in different debates forced me to go back and look at the text again and go, okay,
interesting,
right, there's more going on here. So it kind of forced me to take off the blinders that I had.
Yeah, Josh Blander is probably clapping right now. You have to read more systematic theology. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same way that when I studied analytic philosophy, and which forced me to read a lot of different types of philosophy. Strangely enough, I realized, philosophy is way wider than I originally thought it was. I thought it was one thing, and then the more I read, I was like, it's a lot of things, and everybody's got their own definition.
Which is why, so when you, this was years ago, before you had written your Hebraic philosophy book, when you first told me about it, I was like, that sounds kind of nuts. I'll allow it. Why not? But I just thought it sounded kind of nuts. And then
probably wasn't the best representative of my own work as well. I tend not to be.
It happens sometimes, but I just remember thinking about it later on, like writing. I think it was probably like that day you told me, it was like on the train back home, and just kind of thought, well, it doesn't look like Peter Van Inwagen's Introduction to Metaphysics, but thankfully most things are not like that. As much as I love that book, not everything should look like that. And then I started thinking about, like, remember when I had that like Paul Ricoeur phase, like where I really loved reading him, and I tried to read Sartre. That didn't go very well, but I was like, these are different philosophical traditions, and some of the stuff I see in Scripture doesn't look too far away from that. Poetry, if I'm really, I'm interested in Eastern philosophy and a lot of these different schools of thought. I can't study that without reading some poetry. Okay, and so I started just thinking, lining up all these examples and going, if I'm going to count that as philosophy, then I'm going to have to count this one book of the Bible as philosophy. I'm going to have to count this other one and this other one. And eventually I got to the point of like, what would I exclude in the Old Testament? I don't know. Really don't know.
Yeah. It becomes difficult.
And so it was an example of where you presented a different idea that was contrary to my own, and it forced me to think about it, and I was able to come back to it anew and go, are my blinders on or off here right now?
Success. All right. Yeah. Well, one by one, as the old evangelism platform used to say. Well, and I think that is what and I say in the book, 15, 20 years ago when I was saying, hey, maybe we ought to be paying attention to the biblical narrative a little bit more. There was very much a like, what are you talking about? No, that's not the game we're playing. I do feel like now things have changed. People are just a lot more open, and I don't know why, like sociologically or culturally. Academics why, but people are just a little bit more open to the idea, and it might be just the kind of that general valuing of other cultures that has just gotten typically better and better. Who knows what's going on now? Speaking of empathy and those kinds of things,
sure.
But that like, oh, we have things to learn from other cultures. Oh, well, the biblical authors lived in another culture, so maybe we can put them alongside. And there's no reason. I mean, I have an op-ed written that I've never launched off anywhere. Well, I tried to send it to the New York Times, but they quit doing their philosophy op-eds.
Right.
Basically just saying by any critical measurement, the biblical, Southwest Asian philosophy should be taught in every public philosophy program. If you're going to teach Eastern and Southern Asian philosophy, it should be taught as well as part of the world philosophy curriculum. So I always say, and I think we are also kind of discussing this in light of that you wrote a response to my book that's going to be part of a symposium for Philosophia Christi. I can never say it right. Philosophia Christi, which is the journal for the Evangelical Philosophical Society. So that's coming out, I think, in a couple of weeks, with a few philosophers that responded to it very generously. And all of my one goal is to get people to like not assume that the biblical authors are dumb, that they don't have any sophisticated thoughts, and that they can use these various forms of literature to actually make very sophisticated arguments about the nature of reality, the nature of God, and everything connected in between. And you seem to be one of those people that picked up on it.